Yeah. So the paper is actually longer than it's part of this presentation is actually the conclusion of that paper. So if you're interested in the discussion that leads to this conclusion, I would be really happy if you read the paper. And there, the idea is coming from a very established tradition in anthropology and geography, following things. The most famous example of that is following papaya. The idea of following things is a phrase coined by anthropologist Arjun Appadura in 1988 and expanded upon by anthropologist George Marcus in 1995. Both encourage academic researchers to undertake multi-site research with people whose lives were often unknowingly intertwined through, among other factors, the making, trading, purchase, use, and disposal of things. You're obviously familiar with the work of Jan Cook, a professor of cultural geography. He did this work on following papaya from Jamaica and looking at the relations of production, marketing papaya in the UK as an exotic fruit, and so on. There are other examples of following things. People have followed all sorts of things: batteries, ballet shoes, and money. Some things are really difficult to follow. I use this website, Follow the Things, a lot in my classroom, and I think it's also a very good educational tool to look at the relations of production, especially for students who it expands their geographical imagination. It's like an expedition to follow things back to their production point. But in my research, following data was a bit more complicated, because data doesn't quite fit economic definitions of regular commodities. Data is non-rival. Many people could use it at the same time. People who produce data still own it, but so does the platform owners, marketing agencies, and surveillance organizations. It is hard to standardize data as a commodity or to define its quality. Data lacks fungibility as its units are not interchangeable. Data production transcends the boundaries of so-called local and global. And despite all that, extracted data used for advertising made 89% of Google's and 96% of Facebook's revenues in the first quarter of 2016. So this is something that is very slippery, and it moves a lot. It's very hard to follow, but it still makes a lot of profit. So I started my project by thinking through following things with different approaches. The most established one is Marxist approaches, which defetishize consumer products by following them back in the commodity chain to the production point. And the most famous one is David Harvey's thinking of grapes in a supermarket coming from South Africa, and thinking about grapes gives us an idea about apartheid relations in South Africa. And these approaches, although they apprehend a thing's journey from producer to consumer, this journey is very much understood as linear and focuses mainly on exchange value. And because of that, it's difficult using them in understanding data's constant movements in and out of the commodity cycle. So there are moments in the life of a piece of data that data is moving out of the commodity cycle because it doesn't have any exchange value in this regard. I also used cultural studies because they emphasize on the use value and an object's meaning in different regimes of value. This is, again, an example for that would be now this week there has been a lot of discussion about people excavating the graves of Native Americans using a lot of personal things and artworks that are traditionally put in the grave of a beloved person and sell it again as antiques. So this is something that changes its value throughout its life. And despite the political importance of both cultural studies and Marxist approaches, both of them mainly follow things from the south to the north. And in addition, these things remain traceable, whole, and stable, and do not fall into gaps that make them unfollowable. And data in that sense does not always remain stable or traceable. So I used actor network theory and considered data as an actant. And in this framework, you follow an object's traces through associations and transformations without any a priori theoretical concepts. So what I followed actually was a piece of a video during 2009 uprising that I tried to post on Facebook after a demonstration. It was very difficult because the speed of internet was really low, and Facebook and similar Western social media platforms are blocked in Iran. So I actually followed something that failed to be distributed. And there are many different layers that you can sort of discover by following things back. So from the moment that an Iranian user, for example, starts to use internet, you have very many different layers. You have infrastructures, and there I have looked how, for example, internet entered Iran at the first place and what kind of infrastructure are there at play. I also looked at different surveillance technologies that are used in this journey of Iranian users' data. So there are some, for example, technologies like blacklisting complete URLs or keyword filtering, but there are also more complicated ways to surveil people's data, like deep packet inspection, man-in-the-middle attacks, and SSL blocking. And SSL blocking is basically the new wave of blocking internet access in Iran, because it basically deprives people and users from accessing secure internet connections. And then there's another layer of sort of soft governance of cyberspace. There is an Iranian cyber army, for example, cyber police, different committees and different rules and regulations that try to regulate the cyberspace in Iran. And obviously there is also this side from the users that try to have access to global internet, and they use VPN technologies. This was an exciting part of my research to understand how these VPN technologies are used by users, but also, for example, how Western news agencies such as BBC Persian or Deutsche Welle Persian or Euronews Persian have sort of offer VPN technologies for Iranian users, but they have a very small share in the market, and a lot of private companies offer these VPN technologies. Which interestingly, after some research, turned out that these private companies links with the intelligence services in Iran. So basically, the same people who are controlling the internet and blocking websites are offering VPN technologies. So users are sort of caught up in this cycle of surveillance. These were some sort of reaction methods used by the Iranian government, but there are also some active ways of surveillance. For example, there are parallel platforms in Iran that, for example, there is something similar to YouTube, there's something similar to Facebook, and this is very similar to the way that the Chinese authorities also try to have their own local platforms. What is more concerning for a lot of people in Iran is the new national internet network, and that's basically dividing internet traffic to national and international, and it means that the international network could be turned off at any minute, and they have done it so after the recent demonstrations and uprisings in Iran. And it basically means that there's a national intranet. There are a lot of incentives from the side of the government. So the speed of the internet is much better, and people pay less money if they use the national internet. And you can imagine how easy it would be to use surveillance when the data remains on the local servers. Another concerning point is that the access to national internet network is now going to be coupled with the national digital identity. So basically, you log in with your national digital identity, and then you start surfing in the internet, which makes everything much easier for surveillance authorities to look at your data. So this is basically, these are the outcomes of following data. As I said, I'm not going to go through them in detail. But I think the reason I did this was reading a lot of surveillance theories and data capitalism theories and all these wonderful books that I've written about this issue. It seems that a lot of data experiences from people from the global south are ignored or not paid enough attention. So the story of following data from an Iranian user was a kind of an intimate encounter with data. And based on ANT's theorization of ontological politics, that in ontological politics, it is argued that the object in itself is defined differently by different actors. And based on that idea of ontological politics, I looked at data as a thing that its reality is shaped within the practices in which we interact. And then sort of the paper aims to destabilize discourses of data capitalism that indifferently universalize categories such as user, data, or privacy. What is treated to be a natural process is in fact produced in networks which perform a quite different kind of speciality. Moreover, power is recursively woven into a set of relations that unites the social and the technical. In this sense, so the kind of politics that we see in different approaches to follow the thing, for example, Akbari says politics is what creates the link between exchange and value. Or politics is whoever controlling a thing's motion, its trajectory, speed, transparency, and very possibility. The ontological politics of ANT considers the movement of things open-ended, regardless of possible repetitions, tensions, and failures. So it proposes a kind of politics that is unlikely to come at rest. These contemplations over the politics of moving things produce epistemologies that call for new conceptualizations of political digital geography. In 2010, another interesting turn of events, an Iranian activist sued Nokia Siemens Networks for selling Iran an interception system that monitored voice calls, landline or mobile phone. The activist had claimed that the purchased technologies have made his arrest possible. And in 2009, Huawei and British company Creativity Software won a bidding to supply Iran's second largest mobile phone carrier with a location-based service system. These are few examples of how data conjures up movements of things, people, and technologies globally, and how these movements have political consequences. There has been many calls to democratize data by ending the separation of producers from the means of production, by regulation of collection of data, by collectivizing the platforms in the absence of the state surveillance, or through creating a data labor movement to force digital monopolies to compensate people for their electronic data. All these accounts are based on Western practices of understanding data, without counting for the experiences of people in the countries of the global south. No collective framework of data justice can be drawn. And I argue that data injustice lies in an uneven matrix of injustices, and any discussion about it cannot neglect neither the topology of injustice nor its intersectional nature. And finally, if Harvey intended to rethink the geographical imagination through his inquiry of social relations of production, following data takes one step further in proposing new data imaginaries. Following data is not just scrutiny of how an object moves between places, but also how this movement evokes different spatialities. Discussing a video that fails to distribute is not just noticing a disruption. It is also a desire to not only trace and critique, but to also imagine or develop alternative data assemblages. This case study, therefore, by following data, takes a step towards epistemic justice to demonstrate how data from the South does something and how our reading of this act is political. As data gains profundity, also emerges calls for a digital decolonial turn. This is an effort that entails real work outside the comfort zone of Western democracies, a combination of new imaginaries that necessitate alternative epistemologies by turning universality inside out so that the global is already included in the local. It also reflects on our role as researchers who actively shape the reality by portraying data as a singular, universal object. Following the traces of an unpublished video reveals an intricate assemblage of organizations, policies, laws, codes, software, people, and platforms that could be shunned as a nuance, an example of undemocratic governance of the internet. However, this uncirculated thing narrates by no means an exceptional life for the data produced in the global South. Although grand theories of data capitalism give us political tools to combat the growing profit-oriented attainment of data from users, failing to understand the dynamics of data's journey will produce a naturalized, homogenized, universal image that leaves many realities of data out. Thank you very much.